To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Homecoming. The August heat shimmered off the tarmac as Staff Sergeant Terrence McFarland stepped off the military transport at Fort Bragg. 8 months in Afghanistan had changed him. Not just the new scar running along his jaw from the IED blast in Kandahar, but something deeper. The desert had burned away whatever softness remained in him, leaving only hardened steel and calculated precision. Terrence had spent 12 years in Special Forces before this deployment, specializing in counterintelligence and psychological operations. He understood human nature in its rawest form: how to break a man's will, how to exploit weaknesses, how to make enemies destroy themselves. These skills had kept him alive in places where mercy was a luxury that got you killed. His wife Kayla was supposed to pick him up, but a last-minute text claimed their son Austin was sick. Instead, he caught a ride with Sergeant Mitchell Hess, a fellow operator heading to the same base housing complex. "You ever miss it?" Mitchell asked as they drove through the familiar streets of Fayetteville. "Miss what?" "The clarity. Out there, you know who your enemies are." Terrence didn't answer immediately. He'd been thinking the same thing during the long flight home. In Afghanistan, threats were obvious: insurgents, IEDs, snipers. You could see them coming, prepare for them, eliminate them. But the real damage often came from those closest to you, the ones who knew your vulnerabilities. The McFarland house sat at the end of Maple Street, a modest two-story with white siding and blue shutters that Kayla had insisted on painting last year. As Mitchell's truck pulled away, Terrence noticed the lawn needed cutting and several newspapers had accumulated on the porch. Small details, but in his line of work, small details often revealed bigger problems. He found Kayla in the kitchen, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a sundress he didn't recognize. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her wedding ring, a tell he'd learned to read during their 7 years of marriage. "Terry, you're early," she said, offering a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Austin's upstairs sleeping. Poor thing's been running a fever all day." Terrence set his duffel bag down and studied his wife. She'd lost weight, and there was something different about her posture, more confident, less dependent. 8 months was a long time. How long has he been sick? Just today? "Kids, you know how fast these things come on." Her laugh sounded forced. "Are you hungry? I could make something. I'll check on him first." He climbed the stairs, his boots silent on the carpet, a habit that had saved his life more than once. Austin's room was at the end of the hall, decorated with superhero posters and model airplanes. His son lay sleeping, dark hair tousled, looking smaller than Terrence remembered. Terrence had met Kayla 9 years ago at a bar near the base. She was waitressing, putting herself through community college, and had seemed impressed by his stories of overseas deployments. They'd married quickly, too quickly, perhaps, and Austin had come along a year later. Terrence had tried to be a good father despite the demands of his job, but military life was hard on families. As he watched his son sleep, something nagged at him. The room looked different somehow, cleaner than usual. Austin's bookshelf had been rearranged, and several items seemed missing, including the photo of Terrence in uniform that usually sat on the nightstand. "He's been sleeping most of the day," Kayla said from the doorway, making him turn. "What kind of fever?" "Low grade. I gave him some Tylenol." Terrence nodded, filing away another small detail. No thermometer in sight, no medicine bottles, no tissues. Either Austin was recovering remarkably fast, or he hadn't been sick at all. That evening, they ordered pizza and tried to reconnect. Kayla asked about Afghanistan, and Terrence gave her the sanitized version: desert heat, boring patrols, counting days until he could come home. She seemed distracted, checking her phone frequently. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Just work stuff. You know how Brenda gets when someone calls in sick." Kayla had been working as a receptionist at a dental office for 3 years, ever since Austin started school. Dr. Gerard Morgan ran a small practice downtown, and Kayla had always claimed it was an easy job with good benefits. Terrence had never paid much attention to the details. After dinner, they put Austin to bed together. The boy seemed happy to see his father, chattering about school and his friends, but Terrence noticed something odd in his speech patterns, occasional words that sounded almost foreign, with different emphasis and pronunciation. "Dad, can I show you something cool I learned?" Austin asked as Terrence tucked him in. "Sure, buddy." Austin proceeded to count to 10 in what sounded like Russian. The numbers were pronounced correctly, with the rolled R's and soft consonants that took most people months to master. Where did you learn that? Terrence asked, keeping his voice casual. A friend taught me. He says I'm really smart. What friend? Just a friend from the playground. Mom says I'm not supposed to talk about him too much. Terrence glanced at Kayla, who was standing in the doorway looking pale. Honey, you know how kids are, she said quickly. They pick up things everywhere these days. YouTube, other kids at school. But Terrence knew better. He'd spent enough time in Eastern Europe to recognize native pronunciation when he heard it. This wasn't something Austin had picked up casually. Someone had been teaching him, regularly and systematically. After Austin fell asleep, Terrence and Kayla went to their bedroom. She tried to initiate intimacy, but he wasn't ready. Something felt wrong, and his instincts were rarely mistaken. I'm just tired, he told her. Long flight. She seemed relieved, which was another red flag. The Kayla he'd married would have been hurt by the rejection, would have pressed him about what was wrong. This version just rolled over and went asleep. Terrence lay awake, listening to her breathing gradually slow and deepen. Once he was certain she was asleep, he slipped out of bed and began a careful search of the house. In the kitchen, he found receipts stuffed in a drawer, expensive dinners at restaurants they couldn't afford, charges at stores he'd never heard of. The credit card statements showed a pattern of spending that didn't match their budget or Kayla's supposed work schedule. The real discovery came in Austin's backpack, which was hanging by the back door. Inside, beneath the school supplies and crumpled homework, was a cell phone he'd never seen before. It was a cheap prepaid model, the kind drug dealers and spies used when they needed untraceable communication. The phone had only one contact listed, Uncle Rene. Terrence had been in counterintelligence long enough to know that when something seemed impossible, you were usually missing crucial information. His son speaking Russian, mysterious money, a secret phone. Individually, these could be explained. Together, they painted a picture he didn't want to believe. He memorized the phone number and put everything back exactly as he'd found it. Then he returned to bed, where he lay motionless next to his sleeping wife, planning his next move. In Afghanistan, Terrence had learned that the most dangerous enemies were the ones who smiled while they betrayed you. As he stared at the ceiling, he wondered if he'd been sleeping next to one for years. Chapter 2. Investigation. Terrence woke before dawn, a habit ingrained by years of military service. Kayla was still sleeping, her face peaceful in the early light filtering through the curtains. He studied her features, the woman he'd married, the mother of his child, potentially his greatest enemy. He dressed quietly and went for a run through the neighborhood, using the time to think and observe. The suburbs looked the same as when he'd left, but now he was seeing them through different eyes. 3 houses down, Mrs. Josephine Slater was tending her garden as usual. She'd lived on Maple Street for 30 years and knew everyone's business. Terry McFarland. Welcome home, honey, she called out, waving her pruning shears. How was your deployment? Good to be back, Mrs. Slater. How's everything been around here? Oh, you know, quiet mostly. Though I have to say, your Kayla's been making some interesting friends lately. Terrence slowed his pace. Oh, strange men coming by at odd hours. Foreign-looking fellows, if you don't mind me saying. And that Austin of yours has been spending an awful lot of time at the park with people I don't recognize. Kids these days, Terrence said carefully. Always making new friends. MMM. Mrs. Slater's expression suggested she had more to say, but wasn't sure she should. Well, it's probably nothing. But you know how us old folks worry. Terrence thanked her and continued his run, but his mind was racing. Mrs. Slater was the neighborhood's unofficial surveillance system. If she'd noticed unusual activity, it was worth investigating. When he returned home, Kayla was making breakfast. She seemed jumpy, dropping a plate that shattered on the kitchen floor. Damn it, she muttered, kneeling to collect the pieces. I'll get it, Terrence said, but she waved him off. No, it's fine. I'm just clumsy this morning. Austin came downstairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He was a beautiful kid, with Kayla's green eyes and Terrence's dark hair. Watching him eat cereal, Terrence felt a stab of protective fury. Whatever was happening, his son was caught in the middle of it. Dad, can you come to my soccer game tomorrow? Austin asked. Wouldn't miss it, buddy. Kayla looked up sharply. Tomorrow? I thought you had that thing. What thing? You know, that meeting with the VA about your benefits. I made the appointment weeks ago. Terrence hadn't mentioned any meeting, and he was certain Kayla knew that. Another lie, carelessly delivered. I can reschedule, he said. No need, she said quickly. I'll take Austin. You focus on getting your paperwork sorted out. After breakfast, Kayla left for work, claiming she needed to get in early to catch up. Terrence waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then called Fort Bragg to request a few days of personal leave. His commanding officer, Colonel Eric Doyle, was understanding. Take all the time you need, McFarland. Readjustment can be tough. Thank you, sir. I may need to make a few official requests in the coming days. Anything you need. You've earned it. With Kayla at work and Austin at school, Terrence had the house to himself. He conducted a thorough search, this time looking for things he might have missed. In Kayla's jewelry box, he found a new necklace. Expensive, definitely not something she could afford on her receptionist salary. The clasp was inscribed with Cyrillic characters. In the basement, behind the water heater, he discovered a locked metal box. The lock was high quality, but Terrence had learned to pick locks in special forces. Inside, he found documents that made his blood run cold. Birth certificates for Austin under different names. Passports with Austin's photo but false identities. Medical records showing that Austin had been seeing a child psychologist named Dr. Beatrice Elliott, sessions that Kayla had never mentioned. The notes indicated behavioral modification therapy and linguistic programming. The most damning evidence was a series of photographs. Austin with 3 different men, none of whom Terrence recognized. The men looked Eastern European, with the hard faces and calculating eyes of career criminals. In several photos, they were teaching Austin what appeared to be hand-to-hand combat techniques. At the bottom of the box was a cell phone, not the one from Austin's backpack, but a more sophisticated device. Terrence powered it on and found encrypted messaging apps and international calling logs. Most of the numbers traced back to countries where Terrence had conducted operations, places where American military intelligence was worth killing for. He photographed everything with his own phone, then carefully replaced the items. Years of covert operations had taught him the value of patience. Rush in too early, and your enemies would scatter like roaches. Wait for the right moment, and you could destroy them all at once. That afternoon, he picked up Austin from school under the pretense of spending father-son time together. Instead, he drove to Riverside Park, where Mrs. Slater had mentioned seeing Austin with strangers. Is this where you've been playing lately? He asked as they walked toward the playground. Sometimes. Mom brings me here when she has errands to run. What kind of errands? Austin shrugged, focused on a group of kids playing soccer. But Terrence noticed his son's eyes scanning the area, as if looking for someone specific. Austin, about those friends who taught you Russian, do you see them here? I'm not supposed to talk about them, Austin said quietly. Mom says it's a special secret. Secrets between friends are okay, but secrets from family can be dangerous. Do you understand? Austin nodded, but Terrence could see the conflict in his son's eyes. Someone had spent months programming the boy, creating loyalties that competed with family bonds. It was a sophisticated form of psychological manipulation, the kind used to turn assets in foreign countries. They spent an hour at the park, and Terrence made mental notes of everyone who came and went. Near the parking lot, he spotted a black sedan with tinted windows and diplomatic plates. 2 men sat inside, watching the playground. When they noticed Terrence looking back, the car started up and drove away. That evening, Kayla seemed agitated. She kept checking her phone and jumping at every sound. After dinner, she claimed she needed to run to the grocery store. Want me to come with you? Terrence offered. No, it's just a quick trip. Stay with Austin. She was gone for 2 hours, far longer than any grocery run required. When she returned, she had no bags and smelled faintly of cigarettes, though she claimed to have quit smoking years ago. After Austin went to bed, Terrence confronted her directly. Kayla, we need to talk. She looked up from her magazine, and he saw fear flicker across her face before she composed herself. About what? About Austin speaking Russian. About the men Mrs. Slater has seen coming around. About why you're so nervous. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me. His voice carried the authority he'd used on captured insurgents. I found the phone in Austin's backpack. I know something's going on. For a moment, he thought she might break down and tell him everything. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and met his eyes with defiance. You've been gone for 8 months, Terry. Things change. Austin's just a bright kid who picks up languages easily. From who? Other kids, like I said. Kayla, I'm tired. Can we talk about this tomorrow? She stood up and headed for the stairs, but Terrence caught her arm gently. Whatever you've gotten involved in, we can fix it. But I need to know what's happening. She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something in her eyes that chilled him. Not fear or guilt, but calculation. She was deciding whether he was useful or expendable. There's nothing to fix, she said finally. You're imagining things. As she pulled away and went upstairs, Terrence realized that the woman he'd married was gone. In her place was someone he didn't recognize, someone who saw him as an obstacle rather than a partner. He spent the night in his study, planning his next move. Tomorrow, he would start making calls to old contacts in intelligence, people who could help him understand exactly what he was dealing with. But already, he knew this wasn't just about infidelity or divorce. This was about something much darker, something that threatened not just his marriage, but his son's life. And when Terrence McFarland identified a threat to his family, he eliminated it completely. Chapter 3, The Truth Unveiled. The next morning, Terrence waited until Kayla left for work before making his first call. Sergeant Major Van Maloney had served with him in Eastern Europe and now worked with military intelligence at the Pentagon. If anyone could help him understand what he was dealing with, it was Van. Terry, good to hear from you. How's civilian life treating you? That's what I'm calling about. I need a favor, Van. Unofficial. The line went quiet for a moment. What kind of favor? I need you to run some names and phone numbers through the system. Foreign nationals, possibly Russian intelligence. Jesus, Terry, what have you stumbled into? Terrence gave him the phone number from Austin's backpack and described the men in the photographs. Van promised to get back to him within hours. While he waited, Terrence drove to Austin's school. He'd learned that sometimes the best intelligence came from unexpected sources, and elementary school staff saw everything. The principal, Mrs. Audrey Pitts, welcomed him warmly but seemed nervous when he asked about Austin's pickup routine. Well, usually your wife comes, but there have been substitutes. What kind of substitutes? She called them family friends. 3 different men, at various times. They had written authorization from Mrs. McFarland, so we couldn't refuse. Can you describe them? Mrs. Pitts hesitated. I probably shouldn't, but they made me uncomfortable. Foreign accents, very serious. And Austin always seemed different after spending time with them. Quieter, more distant. Terrence felt his jaw clench. How long has this been going on? Maybe 4 months? I did try calling your wife about it once, but she said you'd approve the arrangement. For months. Kayla had been planning this since before he'd even left for Afghanistan. This wasn't a sudden affair or a moment of weakness. It was a carefully orchestrated operation. His phone buzzed with a text from Van. Call me. Now. Terrence found a quiet spot in the school parking lot and dialed. Terry, who the hell are these people? Van's voice was tense. That's what I was hoping you could tell me. The number you gave me traces back to Rene Lancaster. Real name, Rene Volkov. He's FSB, Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. We've had our eye on him for years, but he's been operating under diplomatic cover. The pieces started falling into place. What's his specialty? Asset recruitment and child trafficking, specifically targeting military families. He identifies vulnerable spouses, compromises them, then uses their children as leverage. Terrence felt the world tilt around him. For what purpose? Information extraction, mostly. Get the kid close to daddy, have daddy share classified details. But there's more. They're also building a network of sleeper agents. Kids who've been psychologically conditioned to activate later in life. My son isn't classified, Terrence said, though his mind was already working through the implications. He'd been involved in numerous covert operations, had access to intelligence that could compromise ongoing missions and get people killed. Doesn't matter. You have security clearance, overseas experience, and knowledge of our operational procedures. Plus, your wife works for Dr. Gerard Morgan, right? Yeah, at a dental office. Terry, Morgan isn't just a dentist. His practice is a front for a money laundering operation. Russian mob has been using it to move cash through the area for years. We've been building a case, but we needed someone on the inside. The betrayal cut deeper than Terrence had imagined. Kayla hadn't just cheated on him. She'd sold him out to foreign intelligence while allowing his son to be brainwashed and potentially trafficked. Van, I need everything you have on this operation. I can't. My son is involved. They've been conditioning him for months. If this goes through official channels, it'll take weeks to process, and by then they'll be gone. A long pause. Give me your secure email. And Terry? Be careful. These people don't leave loose ends. 20 minutes later, Terrence was reading through classified files in his truck. The operation was bigger than he'd imagined. Renee Lancaster had been running a network that stretched across 3 states, targeting military families and gradually building a web of compromised assets. Dr. Morgan's practice was the financial hub, but there were at least a dozen other businesses involved. Kayla wasn't just a victim who'd been seduced. She was a willing participant who'd been recruited early in their marriage. The timeline in the files showed that she'd been providing information about Terrence's deployments and operations for over 3 years. His phone rang. It was Austin's school. Mr. McFarland? This is Mrs. Pitts. I'm calling because one of those men we discussed is here to pick up Austin. He says there's a family emergency. Keep Austin there. Don't let anyone take him. I'm on my way. Terrence broke several traffic laws getting to the school. When he arrived, he found Austin sitting in the principal's office looking confused while a thick-set man with a Slavic accent argued with the staff. This is not complicated, the man was saying. The mother, she called. The boy comes with me. Sir, we need to wait for the father, Mrs. Pitts insisted. The man turned as Terrence entered, and recognition flashed in his eyes. This was one of the men from the photographs. Sergeant Mitchell Hess had mentioned seeing someone matching this description near the base. You must be Austin's father, the man said, switching to heavily accented English. I am friend of your wife. She is in accident. Asked me to collect boy. What kind of accident? Terrence asked, though he already knew it was a lie. Car trouble. She is at hospital, very worried about son. Austin looked between the 2 adults, clearly distressed. Dad, is Mom okay? She's fine, buddy. This man was just leaving. The stranger's expression hardened. Boy comes with me. This is arrangements. No, Terrence said quietly. He doesn't. For a moment, the 2 men faced each other in the school office. The stranger was probably armed, certainly dangerous, but he was also on American soil in a public place surrounded by witnesses. After a tense moment, he stepped back. You make mistake, he said. Big mistake. Probably not my first. After the man left, Terrence collected Austin and drove straight to the bank. He cleaned out their joint savings account. Not much, but enough to disappear for a while if necessary. Then he drove to a storage unit facility where he kept certain items from his military service. Things that weren't exactly regulation but might prove useful. By evening, he was ready. He'd sent Austin to stay with his own parents in Virginia, telling them it was a surprise visit. He'd called in favors to ensure the boy would be protected by people who understood the stakes. Now he sat in his darkened living room, waiting for Kayla to come home. The house was wired with surveillance equipment he'd installed that afternoon, and he had detailed files on everyone involved in the operation. When Kayla finally arrived at nearly midnight, she looked shocked to find him waiting in the kitchen. Terry, what are you doing up? Where's Austin? Safe. Away from here. She tried to maintain her composure, but he could see the panic building. What do you mean, away from here? Where is he? Somewhere your friends can't find him. The mask finally slipped. Kayla's face went cold, and when she spoke again, her accent had changed slightly, the carefully practiced American speech giving way to something more European. You don't understand what you're dealing with, she said. I understand perfectly. Renee Volkov, FSB intelligence officer. Dr. Morgan's money laundering operation. Your recruitment as an asset 3 years ago. The systematic conditioning of my son to serve as a sleeper agent. Her hand moved toward her purse, but Terrence was faster. He'd positioned himself between her and any potential weapons, and his military training gave him advantages she couldn't overcome. Where is Austin? She demanded. That's the wrong question, Kayla. The right question is, how much time do you have before I decide you're not worth keeping alive? For the first time since he'd returned home, he saw genuine fear in her eyes. Good. Fear meant she was finally taking him seriously. You can't prove anything, she said. I don't need to prove anything. I'm not a cop or a prosecutor. I'm a soldier who's been betrayed by his wife and whose son has been threatened by foreign agents. He leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the cold precision of someone who'd interrogated enemy combatants. You have 2 choices. You can cooperate with me to dismantle this entire operation, or you can disappear. Permanently. The woman who'd shared his bed for 7 years stared at him with naked hatred. You think you're so smart, she said. You have no idea how deep this goes. Then explain it to me. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. It's too late. Even if you stop me, even if you stop Renee, there are others. This isn't just about intelligence or money. We're building something bigger. Your son is just one piece. What kind of something? The kind that will make your precious American empire irrelevant. Terrence had heard enough. Whatever they were planning, whatever network they'd built, it ended now. He'd spent years learning how to destroy enemy operations, and now he was going to put those skills to use against people who'd made the mistake of threatening his family. Call Renee, he said. Tell him you need to meet. Tonight. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'll call my contacts in military intelligence and have this entire network rolled up by federal agents. Your friends will spend the rest of their lives in supermax prisons. And if I do call him? Terrence smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then you get to watch me destroy him personally. Chapter 4. The Trap. Kayla stared at her husband for a long moment, clearly calculating her options. Terrence could see the wheels turning. She was trying to figure out if cooperation would give her an advantage or just delay the inevitable. What makes you think I care what happens to Renee? She finally asked. Because he's your ticket out of here. Without him, you're just a compromised asset that the Russians will eliminate to protect their operation. With him, you might actually survive this. It was a lie, but Kayla didn't know that. Terrence had already decided that neither she nor her handler would be walking away from this. But he needed them to believe they had a chance, needed them to feel safe enough to expose the full scope of their network. You want me to betray my own people? Your people? Terrence laughed coldly. Kayla, you're not Russian. You're a receptionist from North Carolina who got recruited because you were greedy and stupid. The moment you become inconvenient, they'll put a bullet in your head. He could see the doubt creeping in. Good. Doubt led to desperation, and desperate people made mistakes. What do you want? I want everyone involved in this operation. Names, locations, financial records, communication protocols. Everything. And in exchange, you get to disappear instead of dying. New identity. Enough money to start over somewhere far away. Another lie. Terrence had no intention of letting any of them escape, but he needed her cooperation first. Kayla pulled out her phone, not the one from Austin's backpack, but a third device he hadn't seen before. She typed a message, waited for a response, then looked up. He wants to meet at the warehouse district. Tomorrow night. Too public. And too much time to prepare an ambush. He's not stupid, Terry. He knows this could be a trap. Then we'll have to convince him it's not. Terrence stood up and walked to the kitchen window, checking the street for surveillance. Call him back. Tell him you've discovered I'm planning to report the operation to military intelligence, but you can convince me not to if he helps you disappear. He'll never believe that. Yes, he will. Because men like Renee think women like you are disposable. He'll see an opportunity to eliminate a problem and secure his own position. Kayla made the call, speaking in rapid Russian. Terrence understood enough to know she was sticking to the script, painting herself as desperate and him as a manageable threat. When she hung up, she looked pale. He's coming here. Tonight. 2 hours. Good. That gives us time to set up. For the next hour, Terrence transformed their home into a kill zone. He disabled the interior lights and positioned mirrors to create sight lines through the house. He moved furniture to provide cover and concealment while limiting his target's options for movement. Most importantly, he activated the surveillance system he'd installed that afternoon. Everything that happened would be recorded, providing evidence of the conspiracy and justification for whatever actions he took. Why are you doing this? Kayla asked as she watched him work. Because you touched my son. He's my son too. Terrence stopped what he was doing and looked at her with genuine curiosity. Do you actually believe that? After what you've put him through? I never hurt him. You let foreign agents brainwash him. You were preparing to hand him over to people who traffic children. You destroyed his ability to trust anyone, including his own mother. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen, Kayla? She was quiet for a long moment. The original plan was just information. You'd deploy. I'd ask casual questions about your work, pass along anything useful. Easy money, no one gets hurt. But then Renee said they needed more. Long-term assets, people who could blend in and access higher levels of government. Austin was perfect, military family, smart, malleable. So you sold him. I was protecting him. Do you have any idea what these people do to families who refuse to cooperate? Terrence felt something cold settle in his chest. Actually, I do. I've seen their work in Eastern Europe. Mass graves full of people who wouldn't cooperate with Russian intelligence. Then you understand. I understand that you chose to betray your country and your family instead of coming to me for help. You were never here. Always deploying. Always off saving the world while I raised our son alone. So this is my fault. You made it easy for them to recruit me. Terrence realized he was looking at a complete stranger. The woman he'd married would never have rationalized betraying their child. This person was a construct, carefully built by Russian handlers to serve their purposes. Where's the real Kayla? He asked. What do you mean? The woman I married. The one who cried when I deployed, who sent care packages, who talked about the house we'd buy when I retired. Where is she? For just a moment, he saw something flicker in her eyes. Pain, regret, maybe even love. Then it was gone. She grew up, Kayla said flatly. A car pulled into their driveway. Terrence checked his watch. Renee was early, which meant he was either very confident or very nervous. Through the window, he could see a black sedan with diplomatic plates. Two men got out, moving with the careful precision of trained operatives. Showtime, Terrence said. Remember, you're desperate and scared. Sell it. Kayla nodded and went to answer the door. Terrence positioned himself in the hallway where he could see and hear everything while remaining hidden. Renee? Kayla said, her voice shaking just enough to sound convincing. Thank God you're here. The man who entered was tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of pale eyes that Terrence associated with career killers. His companion was the same thick-set man who tried to take Austin from school. Where is husband? Renee asked in accented English. Upstairs. He's been drinking since he found out about the money. I think he's passed out. You are certain he will not report? I convinced him that it would destroy Austin's future if it came out. He's angry, but he loves his son more than he hates us. Renee nodded, apparently satisfied. Good. We have plane waiting. You and Boy will leave tonight. What about Terry? He is loose end. Better to eliminate now than risk exposure later. Terrence had heard enough. These people had planned to murder him and kidnap his son. Any mercy he might have considered evaporated. He stepped into the living room with his service pistol drawn. Actually, I'm a pretty light sleeper. Both men spun toward him, reaching for weapons, but Terrence had positioned himself perfectly. He put 2 rounds center mass into the thick-set man before either of them could clear leather. Renee was faster, getting his gun halfway out before realizing he was already dead. He froze, still holding his partially drawn weapon. Slowly, Terrence said, 2 fingers, place it on the coffee table. Renee complied, his pale eyes never leaving Terrence's face. You are making very big mistake. Probably, but not my biggest. Kayla was pressed against the wall, staring at the body of Renee's companion. Blood was spreading across their hardwood floor, and she looked like she might vomit. Sit down, Terrence told her. Both of you. They sat on the couch while he remained standing, gun trained on Renee. Now we're going to have a conversation about exactly how many people are involved in this operation, Terrence said. And you're going to tell me because the alternative is watching me get creative with pain tolerance. I tell you nothing, Renee said. Kayla, explain to your friend what I did for a living in Afghanistan. He's enhanced interrogation specialist, she said quietly. He breaks people for information. That's right. And I'm very, very good at it. Terrence pulled out a knife, not his military issue blade, but a smaller tool designed for precision work. Renee, you have about 30 seconds to decide whether you want to cooperate voluntarily or involuntarily. The Russian stared at him with obvious hatred, but also growing fear. He'd probably tortured people himself, which meant he understood exactly what was being offered. What do you want to know? Everything. Start with how many assets you're running in this area. For the next hour, Renee talked. The operation was bigger than military intelligence had suspected. Dozens of compromised families, several legitimate businesses being used as fronts, and a network that extended into local government and law enforcement. Most disturbing was the children's program. Austin wasn't the only kid being conditioned as a sleeper agent. There were at least 12 others in various stages of preparation, some as young as 6 years old. Where are the children being held? Terrence asked. Safe house in mountains. But you will never find them. We'll see about that. Terrence had what he needed. Now came the hard part. Kayla, call Dr. Morgan. Tell him there's been a problem with the operation and he needs to come here immediately. He won't come. He's too careful. Then tell him Renee is dead and the FBI is closing in. Tell him you need extraction protocols activated. She made the call, and Terrence could hear the panic in Morgan's voice even from across the room. He would come, probably with backup, which was exactly what Terrence wanted. How many more people are coming? He asked Renee. Enough to kill you. Maybe, but you'll never know, because you won't be alive to see it. Terrence put a bullet through Renee's forehead before the man could react. Kayla screamed and scrambled away from the body. Why, she sobbed. He was cooperating. Because he was a foreign intelligence officer who was trafficking American children, Terrence said calmly. And because I gave you both a chance to do the right thing. He checked his watch. Morgan would arrive within the hour, probably with whatever muscle he could gather on short notice. Terrence spent the time preparing the house for siege conditions, setting up overlapping fields of fire, and preparing several nasty surprises for uninvited guests. The real war was just beginning. Chapter 5, The Network. Dr. Gerard Morgan arrived 43 minutes later with 3 cars full of armed men. Terrence watched from an upstairs window as they deployed around his house with military precision. Too much precision for simple criminals. These were professionals, probably ex-Spetsnaz or other Russian special forces working private contracts. Kayla, Morgan called from the street. We know you're in there. Come out, and we can discuss this. Terrence activated the PA system he'd jury-rigged to his home theater setup. Doctor, this is Terry McFarland. Your friends Renee and Ivan are no longer available for discussion. A long pause. Mr. McFarland, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're here to help your wife with a medical emergency. The only emergency here is how many of you are going to die tonight. In response, the men outside began moving toward the house. Terrence had expected this. He triggered the first of his prepared surprises, a claymore mine he'd positioned near the front walkway. The explosion shattered windows and sent 2 of the attackers flying. Fall back, Morgan shouted. Fall back. The assault team retreated to the street, regrouping behind their vehicles. Terrence used the brief respite to check on Kayla, who was zip-tied to a chair in the kitchen. You're insane, she said. They'll kill both of us now. They were always going to kill us. At least this way, I get to take some of them with me. His phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Morgan. Mr. McFarland, let's be reasonable. You have something I need, and I have resources you can use. What could you possibly have that I need? Information about your son's location. Terrence felt ice in his veins. Austin is safe. Are you certain? We've been tracking his movements since yesterday. Lovely grandparents, by the way. Very trusting people. You're lying. Red brick house on Elm Street in Richmond. Your father likes to read the newspaper on the front porch every morning at 7. Your mother drives a blue Honda Civic. They think Austin is there for a surprise visit. Terrence closed his eyes. He'd underestimated the scope of their surveillance network. What do you want? Simple trade. You and your wife for the boy's safety. 1 hour, or we activate assets in Richmond. The line went dead. Terrence stared at the phone, mind racing through options. He could call his contacts in military intelligence, but any official response would take time. He could try to warn his parents, but if the Russians had people watching the house, any unusual activity might trigger immediate action. Terry, Kayla's voice was small, scared. Is Austin really in danger? Because of you. Because of the choices you made. I never meant for any of this to happen. Intentions don't matter now. Terrence made a decision that would have horrified his commanding officers, but felt completely natural given the circumstances. He called Van Maloney. I need immediate extraction for 2 civilians in Richmond, Virginia, he said without preamble. Terry, what the hell is going on? Russian assets are threatening my family. I need a tactical team at my parents' house now. I can't authorize. Then find someone who can. I've got 8 armed hostiles outside my house and information about a child trafficking network that goes all the way to Moscow. Jesus. Okay, I'll make calls. Give me the address. Terrence provided the details, then hung up and prepared for the longest hour of his life. Outside, Morgan's team was setting up for a proper assault. They'd brought shaped charges and looked like they knew how to use them. Terrence had prepared for this contingency as well, but his options were limited by the fact that he needed to survive long enough to ensure Austin's safety. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. The front team used breaching charges to blow the door, while teams moved through the backyard, and try to gain access through the basement. Terrence had prepared for this scenario as well. He triggered a series of improvised explosive devices that turned the basement stairs into a death trap, then engaged the team coming through the back door with precise rifle fire from an elevated position. His military training kicked in completely. This was just another patrol under fire, another group of hostiles to neutralize. The front team made it inside, but found themselves in a house designed to channel them into kill zones. Terrence had removed or repositioned furniture to create fatal funnels, areas where attackers would be exposed while he remained in cover. Two men made it as far as the living room before stepping on pressure plates that triggered shotgun shells wired to the floor. The third man was smarter, using his dead comrades as cover while trying to flank Terrence's position. "Kitchen," the man shouted in Russian. "The woman is in the kitchen." Terrence realized they were trying to use Kayla as leverage. He moved quickly, using knowledge of his own house layout to intercept the attacker before he could reach her. They met in the hallway, and the fight was brief but vicious. The Russian was skilled, but Terrence had years of close-quarters combat experience and the motivation of a man protecting his family. The man went down with a broken neck. "Status report." Morgan's voice came through a radio on one of the bodies. Terrence picked up the radio. "This is McFarland. Your boys need better training." Silence for a moment. Then, "You're only delaying the inevitable." "Maybe, but I'm really enjoying the delay." The next wave came 20 minutes later, more cautious, better coordinated. These men moved like professionals who'd learned from the mistakes of their predecessors. Terrence was forced to fall back to prepared positions on the second floor, using the narrow staircase as a choke point. His phone buzzed with a text from Van. "Package secured. Your father says to tell you the cavalry is coming." Relief flooded through him. Austin was safe. Now he could focus entirely on eliminating the people who'd threatened his family. "Kayla," he called down to the kitchen. "Did you hear that? Austin is safe, which means I don't need you alive anymore." "Please," she sobbed. "I'll do anything. You already did everything. You sold out your country and your family for money." He heard movement downstairs, the remaining attackers regrouping for another assault. This time, they were using suppressing fire to keep his head down while they advanced. Professional tactics, but Terrence had been expecting them. The house's wiring had been modified that afternoon. When he triggered the master switch, every light fixture in the house exploded simultaneously, raining sparks and broken glass while plunging everything into darkness. Night vision had been part of his equipment upgrade. The attackers, caught off guard by the sudden darkness, became easy targets silhouetted against exterior lighting. Terrence moved through his own house like a ghost, using stairs and doorways he'd memorized, engaging targets who couldn't see him coming. It was a slaughter, but a methodical one. Each kill was precise, professional, necessary. When the shooting stopped, only Dr. Morgan remained alive outside. Terrence found him hiding behind his car, weapon drawn but hands shaking. "It's over, Doctor," Terrence said, emerging from the shadows. "Your network is blown, your men are dead, and federal agents are rolling up your safe houses as we speak." "You don't understand what you've done," Morgan said. "This operation was years in the planning. Millions of dollars, dozens of assets, all wasted because you threatened my son. There will be consequences. My government will. Your government will disavow you and pretend this never happened. That's what intelligence services do with blown operations." Terrence raised his rifle. "Any last words?" "Wait," Morgan said desperately. "I can give you information. Names, locations, financial records. Everything you need to destroy the entire network. I already have everything I need. But there are others. Children being held, families being threatened. You can save them." Terrence paused. This was the opening he'd been waiting for. "Talk." For the next 30 minutes, Dr. Morgan provided details about an operation that staggered even Terrence's cynical expectations. The child trafficking network extended across multiple states, with safe houses disguised as summer camps and private schools. The financial network involved dozens of legitimate businesses and at least 3 major banks. Most importantly, Morgan revealed the location of the primary safe house where Austin and the other children had been scheduled for transport. 12 kids, Morgan said, ages 6 to 14. They've been in conditioning for months, some for years. Where? Abandoned resort in the Blue Ridge Mountains. But it's heavily guarded, and if they suspect compromise, they'll kill the children. Morgan nodded. Standard protocol. No witnesses, no evidence. Terrence felt the familiar cold calculation settle over him. This was no longer about personal revenge. It was about saving innocent lives. You're going to help me get those children back, he told Morgan. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'll turn you over to federal agents alive. And I think you know what happens to child traffickers in American prisons. Morgan's face went pale. The offer of a quick death was looking better by the minute. What do you need? Access codes, guard schedules, building layouts. Everything. As Morgan talked, Terrence was already planning the assault. He'd need help. This wasn't a one-man operation. But he had contacts, people who owed him favors, soldiers who would understand what needed to be done. The personal war was over. Now it was time for the real battle. Chapter 6. The Rescue. Dawn was breaking over the Blue Ridge Mountains as Terrence assembled his team at a rest stop 20 miles from the target. He'd called in every favor owed to him, reaching out to operators who'd served with him in Afghanistan and other places that didn't officially exist. Sergeant Mitchell Hess had driven down from Fort Bragg with equipment that wasn't supposed to leave the base. Sergeant Major Van Maloney had brought intelligence assets and jamming equipment. Staff Sergeant Casey Murray, recently retired from Delta Force, had contributed explosives and long-range weapons. The fifth member of their team was unexpected: FBI Special Agent Patrice Elder, a specialist in child trafficking cases who'd been investigating the Russian network for months. This is highly irregular, Agent Elder said as they reviewed satellite photos of the target. We should wait for a full tactical team. Those kids don't have time for bureaucracy, Terrence replied. Morgan's people know their operation is blown. They'll start eliminating evidence, and that includes witnesses. The abandoned resort sat on a mountain ridge, accessible only by a single winding road. According to Morgan, who was zip-tied in the back of Van's truck, the facility housed 12 children in what had once been guest cabins. The main lodge served as headquarters and barracks for the guards. How many hostiles? Casey asked. 8 to 10, Terrence said, based on Morgan's intel. Former military, well-armed, but not expecting a coordinated assault. Rules of engagement? Mitchell wanted to know. Terrence looked at each member of his team. These were people who'd served with him in combat, who understood the stakes when children's lives were involved. There are 12 kids in those cabins who've been tortured and brainwashed by foreign agents, he said. Anyone standing between us and those children is the enemy. Clear. Unanimous nods. Agent Elder looked uncomfortable but didn't object. They moved out in 2 vehicles, taking different routes to approach the resort from multiple directions. Terrence and Casey would assault the main lodge while Mitchell and Van eliminated the perimeter guards. Agent Elder would coordinate with backup units and handle communications. The plan went wrong immediately. As they approached the target, Agent Elder's radio crackled with urgent messages. Multiple federal agencies converging on your location, she reported. Someone tipped them off. How long do we have? Terrence asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. Then we do this fast and dirty. The assault began with Casey's sniper rifle eliminating 2 guards on the lodge's balcony. Simultaneously, Mitchell and Van engaged the perimeter teams, using suppressed weapons to avoid alerting the main force. Terrence breached the lodge's front door with explosive charges, moving through the building with methodical precision. The guards inside were prepared for law enforcement. They weren't prepared for someone who fought like them. The first hostile he encountered was setting up a machine gun to sweep the main approach. Terrence put 3 rounds center mass before the man could acquire a target. The second guard tried to flank him through the kitchen, but walked into a fragmentation grenade. Children's location. Terrence shouted at a wounded guard. Cabins, 7 through 12. The man gasped before losing consciousness. Outside, Mitchell's voice came through the radio. Perimeter secure. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Federal? Negative. Russian markings. Looks like a cleanup crew. Terrence realized they were caught in a 3-way engagement. The Russians were here to eliminate evidence and witnesses. Federal agents were converging to make arrests, and his team was trying to rescue children from the middle of a war zone. Casey, can you reach the cabins? Negative. Too much open ground, and those Russian vehicles have heavy weapons. A new voice came over the radio, Dr. Morgan, apparently having worked free of his restraints. The children have explosive collars, he said. Remote detonation if they try to leave the compound. Terrence felt his blood turn to ice. Disarm codes. I don't have them. Only the site commander does. Where is he? Main lodge, second floor. Office at the end of the hall. Terrence was already moving. He fought his way through the lodge, engaging 2 more guards on the staircase before reaching the second floor. The office door was reinforced steel, but Casey had provided him with enough explosives to breach a bank vault. The blast door didn't stand a chance. Inside, he found a middle-aged man in expensive clothes frantically typing on a laptop while speaking rapid Russian into a satellite phone. Site commander? Terrence asked in Russian. The man spun around, reaching for a pistol. Terrence shot him in the shoulder, sending him to the floor. Disarm codes for the children's collars, Terrence said, switching back to English. Go to hell. Terrence shot him in the other shoulder. I have time for this. The question is, do those kids? Through the window, he could see Russian vehicles positioning around the cabins. Federal agents were taking positions along the tree line. The children were trapped in the middle with explosive devices around their necks. The codes, he repeated. Kill me, codes die with me. I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to start removing pieces until you cooperate. Terrence pulled out his knife and moved toward the wounded man. Sometimes, the threat was more effective than the action. Wait. The man reached for his laptop. Master control, but you need both codes. What codes? Mine and Moscow's. 2-key system. Call Moscow. They'll never. Terrence placed the knife against the man's throat. Call them. Tell them you need emergency authorization to prevent evidence from falling into American hands. The call took 5 minutes. The Russian handler on the other end was suspicious, but the site commander was convincing. Fear was an excellent motivator. We have the codes, Agent Elder reported over the radio. But the Russian team is moving on the cabins. You need to hurry. Terrence typed the authorization sequences while bullets began flying outside. The computer screen showed 12 green lights switching to red, collars disarmed. All teams, children are clear for extraction, he broadcast. What followed was the longest 10 minutes of Terrence's military career. Casey and Mitchell had to fight their way to the cabins while Van held off the Russian cleanup crew. Agent Elder coordinated with arriving federal units to establish a safe corridor for evacuation. The children who emerged from those cabins would haunt Terrence's dreams for years. They moved like broken dolls, speaking in monotone voices, responding to commands in multiple languages. The youngest was a 6-year-old girl who introduced herself with a number instead of a name. 12 subjects extracted, Agent Elder reported as medical teams took charge of the children. All alive, but they're going to need extensive psychological treatment. The Russian cleanup crew retreated when federal helicopters appeared overhead. Dr. Morgan and the surviving guards were taken into custody. The site commander would survive his wounds to face trial, assuming he lived long enough to testify. As they loaded the children into medical helicopters, Agent Elder approached Terrence. This operation saved lives, she said. But there are going to be questions about methods and jurisdiction. Let them ask. Some of these kids may never recover fully. The conditioning was extensive. Terrence watched the helicopters disappear into the morning sky. 12 children who would have vanished forever were going home to their families. That was worth whatever consequences followed. Agent Elder, he said, those questions you mentioned? They can wait until after I visit my son. 3 hours later, Terrence was holding Austin in his grandparents' living room. The boy clung to him like he'd never let go, and Terrence felt the last of his anger finally begin to fade. Dad, are you going to be okay? Austin asked. We both are, buddy. We both are. But even as he held his son, Terrence's mind was already working on the next phase. The network was broken, but not destroyed. There would be others, other operations, other children at risk. The war was far from over. Chapter 7. Consequences. 2 weeks after the mountain rescue, Terrence sat in a federal courthouse in Richmond, watching as his wife was led away in shackles. Kayla had pled guilty to charges of espionage, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Her sentence would likely be life without parole. She'd looked at him once during the proceedings, and he'd seen nothing in her eyes. No remorse, no recognition, no trace of the woman he'd married. The Russians had done their job well, creating a perfect asset who felt no connection to her former life. Mr. McFarland? Assistant U.S. Attorney Janelle Keith approached him as the courtroom emptied. We need to discuss your own situation. I figured. They walked to a conference room where Agent Elder and several other federal officials were waiting. The atmosphere was tense, but not hostile. Let's start with the obvious, Agent Keith said. You killed 11 people in the space of 48 hours. 11 enemy combatants who were engaged in child trafficking and espionage. This isn't Afghanistan, Mr. McFarland. We have laws. And those laws failed to protect my son and 11 other children. Agent Elder leaned forward. Terry, we appreciate what you did. The intelligence you provided has helped us roll up Russian networks in 6 states. But there are procedures. Your procedures would have taken months. Those kids would have been shipped overseas and disappeared forever. The lead prosecutor, a stern-faced man named Austin Keller, consulted his notes. The Justice Department is prepared to offer a deal. Cooperation with ongoing investigations in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Terrence studied the faces around the table. These were good people trying to do their jobs within a system that moved too slowly to save lives. What kind of cooperation? Full debrief on your methods and contacts, Agent Elder said. Testimony in related cases. And we want you to consider working with us officially. The Bureau could use someone with your particular skill set. Terrence almost laughed. After everything he'd been through, they wanted to hire him. I appreciate the offer, but I'm done with government work. Think about it, Agent Keller urged. There are other networks out there, other children at risk. You've proven you can reach people we can't touch through normal channels. What about Austin? He'll need therapy, extensive debriefing, Agent Elder said gently. The conditioning he underwent was sophisticated. It may take years to fully undo the psychological programming. Terrence had been watching his son closely since bringing him home. Austin seemed normal most of the time, but occasionally he would slip into the robotic speech patterns or respond to commands in Russian. The damage might be permanent. There's something else, Agent Keith added. Dr. Morgan wants to see you. Why? He says he has information about other operations, but he'll only talk to you. An hour later, Terrence found himself in a federal holding facility, sitting across from the man who'd helped destroy his family. Morgan looked haggard, the expensive clothes replaced by an orange jumpsuit. You came, Morgan said. Talk. The network you disrupted was just one cell. There are others, bigger operations, children being moved through Mexico and Canada. Tell the FBI. They won't believe me without proof. And the proof is hidden in places they'll never find. Terrence leaned back in his chair. What do you want? Protection. My own people will try to kill me before trial. The Russians don't tolerate failure. Not my problem. Make it your problem. I can give you everything. Bank accounts, safe house locations, the names of every compromised asset in North America. In exchange for what? A new identity after I testify. Witness protection. Terrence considered the offer. Morgan was a monster who'd participated in the trafficking of children, but he was also a gold mine of intelligence that could save other kids. I'll make some calls, he said finally. There's something else, Morgan said as Terrence stood to leave. Your wife wasn't randomly recruited. What do you mean? The operation to compromise you specifically was planned 3 years ago. They knew about your clearance level, your deployment schedule, everything. Someone inside military intelligence? Higher than that. This goes all the way to the Pentagon. Terrence felt the familiar cold anger settling in his chest. If Morgan was telling the truth, the betrayal went far beyond his wife and her handlers. Names, he said. Not here. Too many years. But if you get me protection. Terrence walked out of the facility with more questions than answers. Someone in the highest levels of government had marked him as a target, had arranged for his family to be compromised and his son to be trafficked. That evening, he called Van Maloney. I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. Shoot. 3 years ago, when the Russians first approached Kayla, did anyone in military intelligence know about my deployment schedule in advance? A long pause. Why are you asking? Because Morgan claims this was a targeted operation from the beginning. Jesus, Terry. If that's true, it means someone in our own government sold me out. What are you going to do? Terrence looked out the window at Austin, who was playing in the backyard under the watchful eyes of 2 FBI agents assigned to protect him. I'm going to find out who. And then I'm going to show them the same mercy they showed my son. The next morning, Agent Elder called with news that would change everything. Dr. Morgan was found dead in his cell, she reported. Apparent suicide, but you don't believe it. cyanide capsule embedded in a tooth. That's professional-grade tradecraft. Someone silenced him. And whoever did it has access to federal holding facilities. Terrence closed his eyes. The conspiracy was bigger than he'd imagined, and now their primary source of intelligence was dead. Agent Elder, how many people knew Morgan was talking to me? Maybe a dozen. All cleared personnel. One of them is compromised, or one of them is the actual asset. Terrence felt the pieces clicking into place. The failed security at the mountain resort, the convenient timing of the Russian cleanup crew, Morgan's sudden death. Someone was orchestrating events from inside the government. I need a favor, he told Agent Elder. What kind of favor? The kind that requires you to trust me completely. That night, Terrence began planning his most dangerous mission yet. This time, the enemy wasn't foreign agents operating on American soil. It was Americans who'd betrayed their own country for money and power. And this time, there would be no rules of engagement at all. Chapter 8, The Hunt. Terrence spent the next 3 days conducting his own investigation, using skills learned in a dozen covert operations. The key was patience. Rushing would alert the enemy and potentially get Austin killed. He started with financial records, tracing the money trail that had funded the Russian network. Dr. Morgan's dental practice had been just one node in a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. But money always left traces, and Terrence knew how to follow them. Working from a secure location Van had provided, he mapped the financial network with the methodical precision of a man hunting terrorists. Each transaction told a story, each account revealed connections. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The funding hadn't come entirely from Russian sources. Substantial amounts had been moved through American banks, transferred by people with access to government accounts and military contractor funds. Holy shit, Van whispered as they reviewed the data. This isn't just espionage. It's embezzlement on a massive scale. How massive? $40 million over 3 years. Someone's been skimming from defense contracts and funneling the money through Russian networks. Terrence studied the account numbers and routing codes. The money had been moved by someone with intimate knowledge of military finance systems, someone with authorization to transfer large sums without triggering automatic reviews. Pentagon, he asked. Has to be. This level of access requires security clearance and position authority. The breakthrough came when Agent Elder called with news from the Morgan autopsy. The cyanide capsule was military-grade, she reported. Specifically, the type used by Special Operations Command for emergency situations. How many people have access to those? Maybe 30 worldwide. All of them with clearances so high they're basically invisible. I need the list. Terry, this is way above my clearance level. I can't just. Agent Elder, someone in Sockham sold out my family and killed Morgan to cover their tracks. How many more children have to die before we stop playing by their rules? That evening, the list arrived through encrypted channels. 30 names, including his own commanding officer, Colonel Eric Doyle. Terrence cross-referenced the names with the financial data, looking for connections to the shell companies and offshore accounts. Most of the matches were dead ends, legitimate officers with no apparent ties to the Russian network. But one name appeared multiple times in the financial records. Brigadier General Leroy Sweeney, Deputy Director of Strategic Operations. Sweeney had been involved in approving contracts for companies that didn't exist, authorizing transfers to accounts that led nowhere, and signing off on operations that had provided cover for Russian activities. This is the guy, Terrence told Van. He's been running the American side of the operation. A general? Terry, this is treason at the highest levels. This is what it looks like when someone decides money is more important than country. The question was how to prove it. Sweeney was protected by layers of security and bureaucracy. He couldn't be approached through normal channels without alerting him that he'd been discovered. We need him to expose himself, Terrence decided. Make him think the operation is still viable. Using contacts and military intelligence, Terrence spread carefully crafted disinformation suggesting that Dr. Morgan had left behind hidden evidence that could compromise the entire network. The bait was irresistible. Sweeney would have to act to protect himself. The trap was set for a warehouse district outside Richmond, the same area where Renee had originally wanted to meet. Terrence positioned himself with surveillance equipment, waiting to see who would come looking for Morgan's supposed evidence. Sweeney arrived with a small team of contractors, not military personnel, but private operators who could be disavowed if necessary. They moved through the warehouse with professional caution, searching for evidence that didn't exist. Terrence recorded everything, building a case that would hold up in court. But he also prepared for the possibility that courts might not be enough. Movement on the east side. Agent Elder reported over the radio. She was positioned with backup units, ready to move in for arrests once they had sufficient evidence. "I see them," Terrence replied. For operators, all armed. General Sweeney emerged from a black SUV, directing his team with hand signals. Even in civilian clothes, he carried himself with military bearing. This was a man who'd risen through the ranks of special operations, earning respect and trust that he'd systematically betrayed. "Audio is clear," Agent Elder confirmed. "We're recording everything." Sweeney's team spent 20 minutes searching the warehouse before realizing they'd been led into a trap. When Sweeney finally spoke, his words were damning. "Morgan must have hidden the files somewhere else," he said. "Find them, or we're all going to federal prison." "What about the McFarland situation?" one of his operators asked. "The husband's become a problem. He knows too much." "Orders. Eliminate him. Make it look like Russian retaliation." Terrence had heard enough. These people had planned to murder him and were still threatening his family. Any mercy he might have considered evaporated. "All units, move in," Agent Elder commanded. The warehouse erupted in gunfire as federal agents closed in from multiple directions. Sweeney's contractors were well trained, but they were outnumbered and caught in an ambush. Terrence moved through the chaos with deadly precision, engaging targets who threatened the arresting agents. Two of the contractors went down under his fire before they could escape or destroy evidence. General Sweeney tried to run, but Terrence was faster. He tackled the general near the loading dock, pinning him to the concrete. "Sergeant Major McFarland," Sweeney said, trying to maintain his authority even in handcuffs. "You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting people like you. You have no idea what you've destroyed. This operation was protecting American interests. By trafficking American children? By maintaining necessary relationships with foreign intelligence services. Sometimes sacrifices are required for the greater good." Terrence stared at the man who'd sold out his family and felt nothing but disgust. "Tell that to my son." As federal agents led Sweeney away, Agent Elder approached Terrence. "We got him," she said. "Financial records, recorded confessions, direct evidence of treason. He's going away forever." "What about the network?" "Rolling up assets across 6 states. The children from the mountain facility are all in protective custody and receiving treatment. And Austin? The psychologists think he'll make a full recovery. Kids are resilient, and you got to him before the conditioning became permanent." Terrence felt a weight he'd been carrying for weeks finally begin to lift. The immediate threat was over, but he knew there would always be others. "Agent Elder, about that job offer. Still interested?" "Depends. Are we going to play by the rules?" She smiled grimly. "Whose rules?" "Exactly." As they walked out of the warehouse, Terrence was already thinking about the future. There were other networks, other children at risk, other enemies who thought they could hide behind government positions and diplomatic immunity. He'd spent his military career following orders and working within the system. But sometimes the system failed, and when it did, someone had to step outside the rules to protect the innocent. Terrence McFarland had found his new calling. Chapter 9, Justice Served. 6 months later, Terrence stood in a federal courtroom watching as Brigadier General Leroy Sweeney was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. The judge's words echoed through the gallery. "Your betrayal of the oath you swore to defend this nation represents treason in its most despicable form." Austin sat beside him, healthy and whole, the psychological conditioning finally broken through months of careful therapy. The boy still had nightmares sometimes, but Dr. Rebecca Hickman assured them that even those would fade with time. "Is it over, Dad?" Austin whispered as they watched Sweeney being led away. "This part is," Terrence replied. Agent Elder approached them in the courthouse hallway. Over the past months, she'd become something more than a colleague, a trusted partner in a war that most people didn't even know was being fought. "The network is completely dismantled," she reported. 47 arrests across 9 states, 12 children recovered and returned to their families. "What about the Russian side?" "Moscow has disavowed the entire operation. 3 of their intelligence officers have been expelled and diplomatic protests have been filed." Officially, this never happened. Unofficially, they know we're watching. And they know what happens to people who target American children. They walked out of the courthouse together, Austin between them. The boy had grown in the past months, not just physically, but in understanding. He knew that his mother had betrayed their family, that foreign agents had tried to use him as a weapon, and that his father had fought a war to save him. Agent Elder, Austin said suddenly, "Are you going to marry my dad?" Patrice laughed, a sound that had become more common as the investigation wound down. "That's not really how these things work, Austin. But you like him, right?" "Yes, I like him very much." Terrence felt heat rise in his cheeks. Romance hadn't been on his mind during the crisis, but now that the immediate danger had passed, he'd begun to notice things about Agent Elder that had nothing to do with her professional competence. "Austin, maybe that's a conversation for adults to have in private," he said. "Okay, but you should know she's way prettier than Mom ever was." Out of the mouths of babes. Kayla had been beautiful in a conventional sense, but there was something about Patrice that went deeper. Strength, integrity, the kind of beauty that came from character rather than genetics. That evening, after Austin was in bed, Terrence and Patrice sat on his back porch drinking beer and watching the stars. The house had been rebuilt after the siege, but he'd kept many of the security improvements. Old habits died hard. "What happens now?" she asked. "I've been thinking about that. The bureau offer is tempting, but I'm not sure I want to work within another bureaucracy." "What then?" "Private consulting. Help families who fall through the cracks. Handle situations that are too dangerous or too sensitive for official channels." "Vigilante work? Justice work? There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "It would be dangerous. Everything worthwhile is dangerous. And Austin comes first always. But he's also old enough to understand that sometimes people need help, and sometimes his dad is the only one who can provide it. You need partners. People you can trust. I've got Mitchell and Van on board. Casey's interested. We need someone with federal connections, someone who understands how the system works." "Terry McFarland, are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to make a real difference." She leaned back in her chair, studying his face in the porch light. "What about us? This thing between us. What about it? Mixing business and personal relationships is complicated. Everything's complicated. The question is whether it's worth the complication." She smiled and moved her chair closer to his. "Austin's right, you know. You should ask me out properly. Agent Elder, would you like to go to dinner with me sometime?" "I thought you'd never ask." 3 months later, they were married in a small ceremony at the same courthouse where Sweeney had been sentenced. Austin served as ring bearer, grinning with pride as his father and new stepmother exchanged vows. Van Maloney, now retired from active duty, gave a toast at the reception. To Terry and Patrice, who proved that sometimes the best partnerships are forged in battle. The McFarland Consulting Group opened its doors 6 weeks after the wedding, operating out of a secure facility in Richmond. Their first case involved a senator's daughter who'd been kidnapped by human traffickers. Their second was a military contractor selling weapons to terrorist organizations. Each case was handled with the same methodical precision that Terrence had brought to his war against the Russian network. There were no rules except one: protect the innocent, eliminate the threat. Austin thrived in his new environment. He'd learned from his ordeal that the world contained both monsters and heroes, and that sometimes ordinary people had to become heroes to stop the monsters. His Russian language skills, properly channeled, made him useful in intelligence gathering. "Dad," he said one evening as they reviewed case files together, "do you ever miss Mom?" Terrence considered the question carefully. "I miss the woman I thought she was. But that person was never real." "Are you angry at her?" "Not anymore. Anger's just another prison, and I've got better things to do than stay locked up." "Like what?" "Like making sure no other kids go through what you went through." Austin nodded solemnly. At 11 years old, he understood justice in a way most adults never would. The phone rang. Another case, another family in crisis, another chance to make a difference. Terrence answered it with Patrice beside him and Austin at his elbow, ready to face whatever came next. Some people found their purpose in boardrooms or lecture halls. Terrence McFarland found his in the dark spaces between law and justice, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. It was dangerous work, but it was his work. And for the first time since returning from Afghanistan, he was exactly where he belonged. The war never ended. But now he was fighting it on his own terms, with people he could trust for causes that mattered. And in the end, that made all the difference. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.